So welcome everybody. Let me give you an introduction to Hyperledger. And thank you for joining this first meetup in Tbilisi. I hope that the weather is nice and that you're enjoying your time. My name is Marta Piekarska. I'm Director of Ecosystem for Hyperledger. And my role in Hyperledger is to facilitate interactions with our members, introduce our members to each other, and help everybody understand the ecosystem, because it is quite complicated, I know that, and there are a lot of projects, so we will talk about it in a second. So let's start with what Hyperledger is. Actually a quiz for you. Who thinks that Hyperledger is an IBM project? You can raise your hands. Okay, yeah, good. At least 2 people, that's cool. So we are not a IBM project. We are a collaborative global open source software community that is hosted by the Linux Foundation. What this means is that about 3 years ago, Linux Foundation was asked by about 30 enterprise members. Among them were IBM and Hitachi, Fujitsu, Intel, digital assets, were asked what do they want to do with blockchain, because blockchain was booming 3 years ago. And that's why Hyperledger started. It started as an answer to what enterprises wanted in terms of blockchain. So Hyperledger is 100% open source. It doesn't belong to anybody. Anybody can download the code, anybody can engage with any kind of technical background. We are not pay to play, so you don't have to be a member to get any access, or our members are not treated in any special way when it comes to technology. And we have a very collaborative software development approach, which means that we have very big transparency and longevity that allows us to bring blockchain forward to commercial adoption. Anybody, as I said, is welcome to engage on a technical level, and I'll tell you a bit more how to do it. But just to be sure that you understand, when companies advertise Hyperledger solutions, they're using that same open source code that any of you can here download. And they might host it, they might deploy solutions on top of it, but it's not like they own it in any way. So what is Linux Foundation? Because I mentioned Linux Foundation, and it's probably worth explaining what is Linux Foundation. Linux Foundation was started 20 years ago with an answer to what would happen if Linus Torvalds gets hit by a bus or dies very rapidly. Because there were a lot of people that were contributing to Linux core code, but they were not really governed in any way. They didn't have a place where they could gather together, even online, and talk about things and so on. It was kind of all volunteer and very distributed, and all kind of centered around Linus Torvalds. So we created a Linux Foundation that is dedicated to building a sustainable ecosystem around open source projects. And this means that today, Linux Foundation has over 150 different projects. It's pretty incredible if you think about it, that that many different projects exist. And they all focus on slightly different part of the industry. So there is one focused on energy, there is one focused on, that is LF Linux. You have Node.js, which is the Linux Foundation kind of platform for developing Node. We have cloud native computing that hosts Kubernetes. I'm sure, how many of you heard about Kubernetes? Yeah, okay, so good. So you've heard about some of those projects. LF networking is a very big one when you're in telecom space. And Hyperledger is among those projects, right? And it's very interesting if you compare the number of blockchain projects that have been launched since 2016 with the number of GitHub repositories or GitHub projects in GitHub repository. And you can see a very similar kind of curve of growth of how many projects were there and how many blockchain projects, because blockchain is all about open source. It doesn't really exist without open source. But also, of course, it is a bit like this cartoon, and it has been for quite a while. You know, I think that we should build a blockchain. What color should the blockchain be? I think, blue would be great, because that's really how people think about blockchain. It's this magical thing that exists somewhere in the space. But today, 3 years after Hyperledger was started, where we started really investing in the space, we see that there's a division between permissioned and permissionless networks and public and private networks. And these are not the same things. Because permissioning is about who can write to a blockchain, so who has access to the network for right reasons. While public versus private is who can read, who has the visibility into what happens on a blockchain. And because these are kind of not parallel things, they are perpendicular in a way, you have basically 4 types of blockchain technologies. Permissionless public, which is your Bitcoin, your Ethereum network, the cryptocurrencies. And it makes sense, because when you have a cryptocurrency, you want everybody to be able to access that network, spend money, transact with it, and everybody to observe what transactions happen. The bigger the adoption, the better. On the other hand, if you think about things like medical records or healthcare industry, which I like to bring up because it's very intuitive, you don't want anybody to be able to access information about your health. Probably you only want to read the data and maybe give access to your doctors, sometimes your family, but that's it. On the other hand, of course, only legitimate doctors and nurses should be able to upload information about your health, right? Those who actually did do some tests on you or had meetings with you. And that's why permissioned private network is very good for those reasons, right? I think that kind of makes sense. And then there is permissioned public network, which I really like, and I think this is one of the biggest adoptions of blockchain is in permissioned public networks, because they are basically mimic the way that we today interact, which is we have institutions like the certification bodies or universities or governments that issue you some claims, some certifications, right? They give you permission to drive, or they give you permission to, or prove that you're a citizen of Georgia. On the other hand, anybody should be able to verify that you are a citizen of Georgia, or that you have the PhD in computer science or anything like that, right? So this is why permissioned public networks make a lot of sense. And then there's permissionless private, which are not very popular, of course. So Hyperledger Momentum and what Hyperledger does is we focus on anything that is not permissionless public, right? So anything on the right side of that slide is what Hyperledger frameworks and tools are all about. They can be permissioned public, they can be permissioned private, it doesn't matter that much. So we launched 3 years ago. Today we have over 270 members, so a pretty big number. We actually have more than, this slide is, I should have corrected it, because currently we actually have 14 different projects under our umbrella. So we have tools and frameworks, and we're trying to define what are tools, what are frameworks, so we have 14 different code bases. We also have something that's called Hyperledger Labs that allows you to incubate projects. So if you have a project that comes from a hackathon and you want the community to continue developing it and you're excited about sharing it with others, you can submit your code to Hyperledger Labs as this kind of experimentation R&D field. And we have 12 active community working groups and special interest groups, which I'll tell about in a second, because I love your participation here. So this is our umbrella, and I know it seems very complicated and confusing, but these projects and frameworks are kind of are differentiated by the programming language which they use, the consensus mechanism that is applicable to them, approach to smart contracts, and governance model. So Hyperledger Borrow is our Ethereum virtual machine that runs on top of Tendermint. So it's basically the first Apache licensed, fully open source Ethereum virtual machine, and Tendermint is the protocol of choice. And Borrow actually connects to both Fabric and Sawtooth, allowing Fabric and Sawtooth to use Solidity smart contracts. Hyperledger Fabric is probably our oldest, for sure is our oldest and most mature project, This one has interesting things like pluggable consensus, so you can exchange the consensus depending on your network. It has permissioned channels, so it's really focused on the business side of things and kind of consortium style network. And it's written in Go. It supports other languages, but it's mostly written in Go. And it supports both Solidity and chain code, its native smart contract language. Hyperledger Sawtooth, to talk about a more kind of mature project, is the other one that is in the production version. And this one supports Solidity smart contracts and uses a very interesting consensus mechanism that is called POET, Proof of Elapsed Time. And as I mentioned, it also has a pluggable consensus mechanism, which is something very interesting. It's very flexible, I would say very good to scale. So if you have, while Fabric is great when you need privacy and kind of more closed settings like between banks, Sawtooth is great when you need a scale, when you need to have many participants, many nodes, many networks, you kind of need the trust network. Hyperledger Indy is our identity project. How many of you have heard about Sovereign? Nobody? Sovereign Foundation? Okay, so Sovereign Foundation is one that has very interesting deployments on identity. They are focused on zero-knowledge proofs and verifiable claims for self-sovereign identity. And that's what Hyperledger Indy is. It's a project that came from them, and we are kind of hosting the framework while they are deploying the biggest network. So you can deploy your own Hyperledger Indy, or you can use the one that is from Sovereign. Hyperledger Iroha is focused on mobile applications, so you have iOS and Android SDKs for Iroha, and you can run full SPV proofs on phones. You can't yet run nodes, but you can run proofs. And then we have 3 projects that just started, which is Hyperledger Grid, that is focused on supply chain. It's using WebAssembly, which is a pretty interesting language. And then we have also 2 that are not on the slide because they are so new, which is Hyperledger Transact and Hyperledger Arias. Arias is focused on the protocols of identity mechanisms, while Transact is focused on the governance structure and off-chain communication tools. And then we have the tools. I won't bore you with all of them. I'm happy to answer some questions. 2 that I would want to highlight is Hyperledger Quilt, which is focused on interoperability, and Hyperledger Ursa, which is a shared cryptographic library with some very fun properties. And then if you're looking for a benchmarking platform, Hyperledger Caliper would be the one that you want to use. But to be honest, blockchain is just a technology. It is a very powerful tool, not a solution. And thus the applications are very wide and spanning across all sectors. And I like to underline that because quite often people are like, oh, we'll just put a blockchain in a thing and it'll work. It doesn't, because blockchain is just like AI or you know, it's not like Google just put AI into their search engine and they built the most powerful search engine. They have many other elements that create this powerful search engine. Same with blockchain. So our goals is to create a very enterprise-grade software that is community-driven and promote our community of communities, tell the story of our members. So I still have a bit of time, so I'm going to give you like 2 or 3 use cases so that, you have an idea of what is part of Hyperledger, or what people are doing with Hyperledger. So we'll skip those slides. Here we go. So first is one that is quite famous. It's called, the company is called Hyperledger, and they have built a process of tracking diamonds to prove that they do not come from conflict zones. They now are building a similar use case for wine tracking and provenance of wine and quality assurance of wine. And there is another company called Circular, which has created a supply chain on rare metals. So what they are doing is they are proving the provenance of some of the most rare metals that are used for production of cars. And now their latest project is really cool. It's about batteries. You know, all of the problems with batteries, car batteries that fail, or they are fake or something like that. So they are now working with one of the bigger car manufacturers to create that solution, which is also pretty exciting. Digital identity, I mentioned, this is a very big topic. There are several working live projects. One of them is done by the government of British Columbia. Do you know where British Columbia is? Anybody? Canada. So one of the provinces in Canada has implemented something that is called Orgbook, which is a method of tracking the registration of companies. So you can look up a company and make sure that it's a legal company and that you can transact or exchange information with it. The other identity project also on Hyperledger Indy is in Philippines, where the Bankers Association of Philippines is creating a KYC model because only 44% of Filipinos have bank accounts due to cumbersome process of know your client, so submitting all the documents. And one that I really like is about green assets management. This is incentivizing companies to track and prove carbon emission and making sure that they are encouraged to produce less carbon. This is done also on Hyperledger Fabric and in China. So that's how blockchain helping the world or sustainability. This one is really interesting. It's actually IP Chain is a Russian-based network it's a non-profit that develops standards, technologies, and tools for an effective collaboration between IP market participants. And one of my favorite projects from them is Ko-fi. It's the fourth here on the right-hand side. It's the first Russian crowd investing platform, which allows you to invest based on IP of various companies. So it actually creates assets based not only on what you own or how much you have in the bank, but on the potential of your company in terms of intellectual property, patents, and so on. So it encourages a very different type of investment, and also allows everybody to invest based on current size. So I mentioned working groups and special interest groups because I know that as you start your adventure with Hyperledger, and obviously you are interested because you came to this meetup, it might be very challenging to just jump in and start coding. And I'm sure some of you are coders, but most of you probably just want to learn. So we have technical working groups, which are focused more on certain aspects of blockchain technology, like architecture, identity, performance and scalability, and so on. And you can get engaged with any of them. I will share this presentation later on with you guys, and you can just click on those links, or you can simply go to our wiki.hyperledger.org, and you will find all of the list of those working groups. They are meet online, anybody can join them, you can just dial in and listen, you can read what is happening on the mailing list at the beginning, but it's really good to do it. On the other hand, if you are a specialist in some kind of a domain, like healthcare, telecom, trade finance, public sector, social impact, or supply chain, and now also capital markets, which launched just yesterday, special interest groups are focused on certain verticals, as you can see, certain industries. So for instance, healthcare working group, a special interest group, has a lot of doctors and nurses being on that group. They don't necessarily understand the technology, but they do understand what problems community has, so that we can kind of work with them to develop blockchain solutions for that special industry. So again, feel free to lurk in. Some of those groups are working on white papers, so you could contribute by working on some of the white papers. And this is a great place to also listen to presentations of people doing certain things in certain areas. As I mentioned, we have very good wiki, wiki.hyperledger.org, and website, hyperledger.org. Both of those have a lot of information. You can see here we have webinars, we have tutorials, trainings, publications, and all that stuff. Wiki will have more of the technical aspect of things. They'll have contributor guides if you want to contribute and so on. And we have 3 self-paced trainings. I highly recommend the 2 free ones. So Introduction to Hyperledger Technologies and Understanding its Uses and Implications. First one, the Understanding its Uses and Implications is a very high-level kind of blockchain course, while Introduction to Hyperledger Technologies goes both about blockchain, but also teaches you how to deploy on Hyperledger Fabric, Hyperledger Sawtooth, and Hyperledger Iroha. So you can take them for free. They are on the open source platform called edX, and learn more. They are very good. And that's it from me. I welcome questions, and then I can just write it to me probably if you have questions. And I wish you very good collaboration, and I encourage you to discuss as we finish this this presentation, to discuss among each other what you expect from Hyperledger Meetup. What do you want to do during this meetup? Because you are the community now, and it's on you to decide what topics should be part of the meetup.